Adam Witty. Welcome back to Build Your Authority. Adam Witty, sir. I feel like we've really gotten close over these 2 seasons of recording
Yes.
this show. But we're gonna bring in someone. It's almost like a bromance that you two have, and Rusty Shelton. You're co-author on a couple of books, and Rusty is sort of, I've always called him like sort of like the authority Yoda. Like he knows how to become an authority. He's a little more attractive than Yoda, slightly more, but he does know how to help authors and entrepreneurs build their authority. So I never asked you this question. How did you and Rusty meet to become like these good friends or go into business together, write a couple books? But how did that initial meet happen?
Well, Joe, you didn't add that Rusty is also a lot smarter than me too.
Okay.
But I
I
but I
can't say
think
that, Adam.
I think that will be demonstrated very clearly in this podcast. So Rusty and I met through a mutual friend. We took in a football game together. I was the good luck charm and helped his Texas Longhorns take it to the house and beat the Oklahoma Sooners in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl. But ultimately, just really kind of came to the conclusion that we could do more together than separate, and 1 plus 1 could equal 5. And so, in 2016, his company Shelton Interactive joined Advantage Media, and then we said, "Hey, let's start working together on books and building our thought leadership together." So, of course, as you mentioned, in 2018, Authority Marketing came out in 2018. And then in 2023, 5 years later, the Authority Advantage came out. And so now, we've got to be working on book number 3. But that's how we initially met. And it's just been a great friendship and a great professional collaboration ever since.
It has, Joe. This is the rare acquisition story where you're closer to the group that acquired you, and certainly the founder that acquired you 9 years later than you were when it happened. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Well, Rusty, as Adam just portrayed, he has the goods. He's a senior marketing strategist here. Co-authored a couple books. You're still in business, very active, Rusty. So welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys having me.
All right. Well, I guess I got to ask you now. First impressions of Adam Witty, because again, it was sort of a blind date. Essentially, it sounded like you guys went on to. What were your first thoughts about Adam?
Really tall, great head of hair. No, I mean, I asked around about Adam. So I spent a lot of time early on really calling some friends, people I trusted in the industry. And, one of the things that was loud and clear, great reputation across a lot of years. A lot of fans among people that I really respected, which is one of the reasons I was excited to get to know him. Came in and one of the things I've always loved about Adam is just crystal clear vision for where he wants to go with the business, and alongside crystal clear vision, just a commitment to culture. And I think that's something I've seen, especially over the last 9 years, just really grow. And I think is one of the reasons we are where we are as a company is because of that continued commitment alongside growth. So in addition to that, a lot of fun. He and I share a lot of interests around college football, not so much the aviation side of things, but
Right.
we'll take what we can get.
Rusty, don't worry. I'm sure Adam's going to lay in an aviation metaphor at any moment. So
Without
you
a
have to
doubt.
worry about that. Yeah. So, you mentioned the fact that you guys have been working together for 9-10 years. And this episode, we're going to focus sort of like on the present and future of authority. But let's just take a step back and talk about authority in your life, Rusty. When did you realize, because this is how Adam built the company, when did you realize the importance of authority in your own career?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me in my career was just seeing the impact of speaking. So I started off out of college at a book PR firm in Austin, Texas, really small firm. And, my goal at that point was to go out and build relationships with publishers in New York City that, at that point, you think back to 2003, 2004, just to show my age here, Austin was kind of a blip on the radar for publishers up in New York and in some of the bigger metro areas. And so one of the things that I saw just kind of along the way, Joe, was the position of authority that I was able to get beyond my years as a result of speaking at conferences at Harvard Medical School or the San Francisco Writers Conference or some of the other big ones through the years. And what that did was the authority by association that happened as a result of that allowed me to, punch a little bit above my weight class, if you will, in terms of building relationships on a higher level. We, had a chance to work with some of the bigger authors through, the next 10 to 15 years of my career. And probably the biggest light bulb, Joe, just in terms of kind of what we're talking about today, the future of authority, was seeing major corporations start to pay attention to the fact that, yes, their corporate brand was really valuable, but the old outlook on it from most of the bigger corporations in the world was, all right, we're going to take our team and we're going to hide them behind the corporate logo, right? Everything is, leading with the company. And, we have seen through the years that shift dramatically where institutions, whether it is educational institutions like a Harvard Medical School, whether it's major corporations, nonprofits, et cetera, are waking up to the fact that their biggest untapped marketing resource is not the corporate logo, it's the subject matter experts, what we call the authorities that are within that organization. And the better that they can kind of bring them out alongside the organization, the quicker they're going to build trust with an increasingly skeptical audience.
Adam, I have a feeling you might agree with Rusty.
Yeah, well, and the other thing with Rusty is he has been a pioneer on the digital media landscape. And when Rusty and I met in 2015, I was really well established with Advantage Media and Advantage Books. And at the time, our big focus was, of course, helping entrepreneurs and leaders write and publish books. And there were a lot of things associated with promoting a book that we were really good at. But an area that we were weak and deficient was really helping that author unlock the potential that was in the digital media landscape, right? So that's not just social media, but that's public relations, that's building their digital footprint online through their personal brand website, through content that would be that would live on that personal brand website. And Rusty really helped me see all of the opportunities for our authors that lived online that we probably weren't fully tapping into. And even to this day, I really credit him as being one of the forward-most thinkers on leveraging authority through digital media and online.
And Rusty, you mentioned the fact that you've been doing this for a while, and I want to talk about the idea about like information democracy, because back then, I mean, the internet was around, but now we just have information at the fingertips. So anyone could just memorize information, regurgitate it. So what's a differentiator between someone who can just gobble up a bunch of information and just spit it out, as opposed to someone who's a thought leader? Because that thought leader needs the information, but also they need the information too. So what separates the two of someone? Because you're down in Austin with Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan is great at memorizing studies and facts and then spitting them out, but it doesn't make him a thought leader in that particular field. So tell us about the difference between those two facets.
Well, I mean, I think where we are today, where we're going, there's no shortage of content, right? Of information out there. AI is going to take what is already an overwhelming amount of options and just take it through the roof, right? And so when I talk to leaders, as Adam and I are speaking to groups and working directly with leaders, the focus is not, just sort of the general education or providing content that, is more what I'll call kind of formal and homogenized. What's actually working today, Joe, really interestingly, is for those leaders to be more of themselves as they create content. And so I think one of the biggest things, we saw a study that came out from Edelman recently that said, when we are looking to learn new things, we want to learn new and innovative things from people that we see as like us. And I thought that was really interesting because the authorities that I really respect and kind of our philosophy around this, Joe, is the best balance for somebody to build true thought leadership is on one side of the coin to have essentially third-party validation that says what I don't want a leader to say about themselves, which is, top of their category thought leader because they're quoted in Forbes or they've written for Entrepreneur or they've been featured at Harvard Medical School. They wrote the book on the topic. In other words, I want other people to say what I don't want you to say about yourself, which builds credibility. And then on the other side of the coin, that leader has to be willing not to put on the suit and tie and play this kind of formal role of what they think an authority should be. Instead, what's working is exactly the opposite to your Joe Rogan point, not necessarily to promote him, but the reason he's been so successful is he's more of himself. In other words, he leans into his personality, his perspective. And there's a certain number of people that aren't interested in that, but there's a lot of people that are really interested in that. And so, as people that are kind of watching and listening to this, one of the biggest things, if you're going to compete in the age of AI, where I can learn about leadership in a million different places, the only reason to follow your podcast or your blog, as opposed to all the other options out there, is because I, I'm entertained. You built rapport with me. You're bringing a perspective and a personality that I can't get elsewhere. And so I think that's the biggest thing, Joe, that I want to make sure that people that are watching and listening to this are kind of understanding is it's not just about creating content that educates somebody. It's also about bringing a perspective and a personality and a certain level of entertainment to the table that they're increasingly looking for.
And Joe, don't forget, this really harps on that word authenticity. We've had a couple of episodes of this podcast previous where we've talked about AI in depth and how it'll affect creating content and thought leadership. And, the one thing that AI can't be is authentic, right? And so the more authentic you as a leader are, the more attractive that's going to make you to people, not necessarily all people, but some people. And it's important that you, as a thought leader, know who is the target audience that I'm most wanting to impact with my knowledge, with my content.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And Rusty, you mentioned AI, and we've talked on past episodes, but you personally, where do you see it fitting now in the future of authority? The fact that we can get all the information we want from AI, but you're not gonna be able to build your authority just using AI. So what are some important tidbits you could share about that?
Well, Joe, you mentioned democratization, which I think is something for us to really talk about today. It's one of the reasons that as Adam and I talk with leaders, there's an urgency to me around getting active right now. So our first book, Authority Marketing, we talked about the 3 eras of authority, and the previous era to where we are right now was one where to get to an audience at scale, you had to go through the media, right? You had to have somebody at one of the major newspapers or radio stations or TV say, okay, I'm willing to put this out. And you're kind of beholden to them as gatekeepers to get to that audience. We have been in a phase of the authority era since then where that audience increasingly wants to push the media out of the way and learn from Adam or learn from Joe or learn from others that are individuals because we trust each other more. I am worried in the future about an increasing level of gatekeeper that is getting established, whether it's through Chat GPT or Perplexity or the other major AI models, because those are going to become such gatekeepers on results that are getting returned that I actually think we're in a period of time right now where there's a level of urgency for leaders to get active and get visible so they get ahead of an environment where it may be harder to actually get to an audience than it is today. And so I think that's a point of urgency. I just want to mention to leaders because as AI assistants and agents become a bigger part of the way we are consuming information, they're in control of what's getting returned as results. And when we get a little bit further down the road, I think it's going to be harder and harder to come from the ground up and get visible there. So I think the next 5 to 10 years are incredibly important for leaders to get active, to get ahead of what I think is going to be a harder environment for people.
Joe, that's such an important point that I really haven't heard articulated so well by anyone. And it's important because when you think about what today is search, right? If you search for something online, of course, there's an algorithm that's assisting with that search, but you, as the end user, get to choose the result, right? You filter through the search results, and then you choose what you want to watch, what you want to listen to, what you want to read, who you want to pay attention to. But with AI, you put in a prompt and it's giving you one answer, and the algorithm's choosing where they source that one answer from. And so while on the face, AI seems to offer so many possibilities that are democratizing everything, to Rusty's point, in a way, it's actually narrowing the field, and the algorithm decides what's the one answer that you're going to see. Now that in and of itself is an entire episode and an entire conversation that we won't have right now. But to Rusty's point, if you're not a thought leader, if you don't have any content that's online, then you're a ghost and you've got no shot.
Yeah. So, Adam, what you're saying is in search, if you typed in, give me a thought leader on publishing, Adam Witty may come up in one of those top 10 searches. But in the world of AI, it'll be like the Adam Witty from Random House will come up as the lone person. So that's where we're getting at. The fact that if you don't have that content in there, AI ain't going to pick you, Rusty, right? So tell us about the importance of creating all this content so that eventually when the AI bots and cybernet take over the world, that you will be the answer to the question.
Yeah, well, I think one of the important things for people to do right now, Joe, is just get a sense of where they are. One of my favorite AI tools around, kind of getting a sense of where your personal brand is Perplexity. So perplexity.ai. And what I want to encourage for people that are listening and watching to this, go to perplexity.ai and say, tell me about, if I was doing it for myself, tell me about Rusty Shelton or tell me about Adam Witty and put your name in. And the thing I want you to ask yourself when you see the response there is twofold. Number one, are you the Rusty Shelton that came up? Meaning for your name, is somebody else owning that prompt rather than you? And if the answer to that is yes, similar to a Google search, Adam and I hit this so hard in our recent book, The Authority Advantage, but it is hard enough to get somebody to type your name into Google or to type your name into Perplexity because you got referred to them or because they heard you on a podcast, etc. If they type your name into Google and they've got to pack a lunch and go 7 pages deep to find your LinkedIn profile, they're probably not going to do that. Or within the context of Perplexity, if they're getting somebody else that shares your name and they can't find the version of that name that is you, we're making this much harder on ourselves than we need to. So we talk a lot about, one of my favorite PR and marketing authors, a guy named David Meerman Scott. Right? His name's David Scott, and he recognized really early in his career that if he continued with David Scott, he was never going to own search for it because there was a congressman that shared that name. And so he changed his name. He added that middle name in there and immediately owned search. And Joe, I know this may feel way in the weeds, but I'm hammering this because this is going to get even more important with AI prompts. And that is if you don't have a name that you can actually own that prompt for, it's much harder for people to find you. And so, doing a bit of a brand audit, we used to do it just through Google. Now, when we're talking with new authors, we're actually looking as much at Perplexity and ChatGPT in terms of the prompt response as we are with Google results. I think it's really important for people to have a name that they can own search for. That's number one. Number two is once you get that response, if it's you, I want you to really pay attention to the results that are actually informing the response from Perplexity. And one of the things that we're seeing right now, one of the biggest benefits of doing a book is a lot of the results that come back are press releases around a book launch, or it's, media coverage that you've got. In other words, they're sourcing. This is becoming for a lot of leaders, the biggest value of PR is actually leveraging it to inform these AI language models and what comes back on a search for you. So pay attention to what you have in terms of some of those search results. And I'm typically seeing PR And visibility across social media is one of the big things that are actually returning those results. It's another reason to do that.
Cool. Well, two things. David Meerman Scott was on last season. We'll add that link below. So if you want to check that out.
Awesome.
And two, Adam, I went to Perplexity and I asked it, tell me about Adam Witty. And it came back with your big, shiny smile. And it said, Adam Witty is a prominent entrepreneur and business leader, best known as the founder of CEO of Forbes Books, the book publishing brand of Forbes Media. And it goes into your career highlights. It talks about you being an Eagle Scout. So, Adam, you've achieved perplexity, if that's a thing, that the perplexity knows who you are. How does that make you feel, Adam?
Man, it makes me feel 10 feet taller than I already am. So Rusty, let's talk about digital, right? Because I mentioned earlier that, what really attracted me to you initially was just your pulse on the digital landscape. So of course, digital never stays constant. It's evolving so quickly. What new strategies are you seeing are emerging that are helping leaders build thought leadership? And what are some of the highest and best ways that a leader can use some of these new digital opportunities to further build their authority?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. Number one, just going for a second back to that brand audit that I just mentioned. One of the biggest things I want leaders to ask themselves when they do that audit, and again, do it on Google, do it on Chat GPT, and do it on Perplexity. I want you to ask yourself, do the results that I'm getting back here match where I am today? I talked to a leader last week, Adam, somebody that's going to be publishing with Forbes, and we were looking at the results for his brand audit, and it reflected a position he hasn't had for 18 months. And it's because he hasn't thought to go in and actually update. So the basics, and that sounds so basic, but my expectation is for a lot of people watching this and listening to this, when they go to this brand audit, you're like, that's not accurate. That's not what I'm doing now. So bring it current. And make sure it's reflecting what you're doing today. That would be number one. Number two, Adam, as old and archaic as this may sound to some people that are watching this right now, we are seeing such continued growth in what we're doing right now, which is podcasting. There was a recent study that came out that said 1/3 of Americans over the age of 12 years old, 1/3 listen to a podcast on a weekly basis. An additional third listen to a podcast on at least a monthly basis. Those are staggering numbers. And I think for me, when I talk to leaders that are already maxed out, they're already really busy, part of what we're always trying to solve for is what's best and highest use of your time. Because whether it's AI, whether it's support, there's 80 to 90% that can be solved for that doesn't require that leader's direct time. When I think about best and highest use, it is how can I use content marketing as a way to activate an existing network or build outbound relationships with people that I want that person to get to know. One of my favorite examples of this, one of our biggest clients is one of the fastest growing regional banks here in the state of Texas. And you walk in the door to their bank branch in downtown Austin, it's all the normal stuff you'd see from a modern bank branch. The thing that stands out, you turn to the right when you walked in, there's a podcast studio in the bank branch. And the bank president uses that podcast not to riff on mortgage rates or why they're the best bank. He uses it as an excuse to activate relationships with bank investors, with bank customers, but also as a foot in the door with people that he wants to get to know. And so what happens with that podcast, interestingly, Adam, is when somebody's thinking about working with that bank or they get referred to Jeff, who's the bank president, and they're Googling his name or they're popping it into an AI prompt, that podcast is one of the first things that comes back as a result. So it becomes, number one, a really good excuse to reach out to people that he wants to build relationships with. But number two, it also allows people to kind of get to know him before they make the decision on whether or not they want to come into the bank. So I think the biggest thing, just to tie a bow on that for a second, is I want to make sure that leaders who are actively building their authority are focusing their personal time on best and highest use. And in my experience, best and highest use is kind of that overlap between creating great content that their audience is looking for that also builds or strengthens existing relationships.
And Joe, if I can add one thing to what Rusty said, it does amaze me that I will be introduced to a CEO, an entrepreneur, a leader who has a pretty big profile, and I'll go to LinkedIn and type in their name, and it's got their name, but it's got like the cartoon shadow image because they've never uploaded a photo. uh, it's just amazing to me that somebody with such a big profile is just completely absent on a platform that, you know, hundreds of millions, I guess really probably billions of people are using every day to do their research on business introductions or business colleagues or companies that they might be working with and the people within those companies. So yeah, I just want to double down on Rusty's comment there that it's kind of jaw dropping sometimes when you type a person's name in and you just see nothing. They're a ghost.
Yeah, and it's scary. And it's funny. I want to pick your brain on this, guys, because I met with a client a couple of days ago who's publishing a book with us, and they're a doctor, and he said, "Listen, I want to build my authority, but I don't want to be an authority as a doctor. Like, I don't want it to be about my medicine. I want it to be about leadership. How can people guide where they become authorities in? Because, like you guys mentioned at the top, like you have to have this base knowledge to become the influencer or authority, what have you. But you then want to branch off into something else. So, Rusty, start with you. Like, if someone has a specialty, but they're like, listen, this is my specialty, but I want to be plus. I want to be plus this. What do you say to folks like that?
Well, I always love hearing that because I think that makes it allows them to build rapport and attract more people because it's not just about that one thing. So I always encourage people to think about it like a pie chart. So if you're starting from scratch, we want to be really pragmatic with kind of that core area of expertise that people are actively looking for you on. So for this physician, it's probably around that, but also weave in some things that they're also interested in. So, like for me, for example, I spend the bulk of my time talking about what Adam and I, are kind of on a mission to do, which is help entrepreneurs and leaders build thought leadership focused on impact, not ego. That's the bulk of it. But also talk about Texas football. I whine about airplane etiquette. I talk about entrepreneurship. In other words, there are other areas in that pie chart that number one are fun for me to talk about, but I also think make it more interesting for an audience that also, yes, wants to learn about the thought leadership side. And so my opinion on this, Joe, is always kind of lean into the area that is of most immediate importance, but start to weave in things that open doors for where you want to go. So, a lot of our authors are writing a book with an eye on 5 to 10 years from now when they transition from current role into advisory work, into board work, into some of the things that they really want to spend their time doing, speaking, et cetera. And so they've got pragmatic things they need to do that connect to their role right now, but understanding again kind of the urgency of planting that flag ahead of where we may be going with AI. They need to start creating content in some of those other areas as well. So I encourage people to do that, but you want to be really thoughtful about how much you're doing it alongside the kind of the more immediate need for what people are looking for.
Well, Joe, there's a marketing colloquialism, and it's use every piece of the cow. And what I would say to our member who is working on a book with us is that, listen, you may not have a book about medicine, though you're a doctor. You may not want your message to be reaching your patients or your future patients. You may have an entirely different audience that you want to reach with this message of leadership, but use every piece of the cow. And the cow being that, hey, you're a doctor. You invested decades of your life to become a successful and prominent doctor. And if you ask most people on the street, name an authority position, an authority role, I would think top 3 would be physician, doctor, right? When you put the title DR period in front of your name, like, people immediately kind of sit up straight and they salute the flag. So being a doctor immediately gives you a higher level of authority than probably most other people. So use that to your advantage, right? You don't have to make talking about your medicine and your path in becoming a doctor the central part of your message. But I would also say don't ignore it. Don't pretend like it isn't there, because it's an asset that you can use. And that whole idea of just using every piece of the cow, that's a lesson for anybody, because we all have accomplishments in our past that may not be central to what we're doing in the future, but it does build our authority, right? I mean, look, I'm an Eagle Scout. 1999, I was awarded Eagle Scout. That was a long time ago. It's not central to what I'm doing in the future, but people have great respect for the time, the tenacity, the work that it took to make the rank of Eagle Scout. So I'm not going to hide from it.
And Perplexity obviously featured it. It was in your setting, so it means something to somebody. And so even to AI. And
Right.
Rusty, on the subject of AI, we did a deep dive into it earlier this season. And boy, let me tell you, Rusty, Adam he was riled up pretty good, because, as you
I
know,
believe it.
the ethics of AI and plagiarism and all that stuff. So let's talk about ethics, AI, and thought leadership. Not even just in the AI bucket, but like the overarching discussion around ethics and building your authority. Tell me about your first, like, when people talk to you about the ethics of authority building. Let's get into that.
Well, I think the ethics of authority building is one of the most important things for leaders to think about when they go into this. And it really, I think people make it more complicated than it needs to be. So it's the same stuff that as you are building out, whether it's a resume or a bio, et cetera, you want to be authentic to the actual experience that you have. And I think one of the most frustrating things, or one of the most common things I see from leaders as a objection to getting visible and building authority, is, for many of us, our minds go to people that are doing this the wrong way, right? Building a "hey, look at me" kind of brand. And so I think for me, part of what I always encourage leaders to think about is the impact that they are making offline for people that are fortunate enough to deal with them directly, or to be on their team, or to be among their client base. um, if they've got important information to share, there's also, I think, an ethical motivation to share it at a bit more scale with people that may not be lucky enough to walk into their place of business. Or as a physician, if they got important information to get out, may not be lucky enough to you know walk into the exam room, et cetera. And so I think for a lot of people, that's one of the biggest motivations that they have, is like, I don't want to be famous. I want to make an impact at scale. And what we know today is the best way to make an impact at scale and to communicate information is not to do it through an institution or through a business. It's to have the individual be the messenger, not the message. And so I think that's one of the biggest things I want to encourage people to think about. There are a lot of people that are getting in a lot of trouble trying to publish AI generated articles that they're just mailing in. And there are a lot of very easy tools to use as to whether or not this was AI generated or not, putting aside just the nature of the way they read. And so I would encourage people, as they think about AI, to not mail it in as a substitute for doing the work, but instead to become more efficient in writing things and creating content in your own voice. I talked about this earlier. What separates people that are doing this well from people that are not are people that are being authentic and bringing their personality to it. Coming back to what I would argue, and what Adam and I spent a lot of our time in the last book talking about, the most important outcome from building authority is accelerating trust for your organization, for your cause, for your message. And again, if leaders are willing to be the messenger, not the message, it's going to go further, quicker, cheaper than if they try to communicate it through the company or through the institution.
And Joe, if accelerating trust is the key thing, using AI to create content that's not really yours, that you simply put your name on and claim as your is the furthest thing from creating trust, right? It's an absolute untrustworthy thing to be doing that. A lot of people, of course, are. So, trust and authenticity, those are two words that go hand in hand. And, if you look at yourself as a consumer, you're a consumer, I'm a consumer, Rusty's a consumer, right? We invest in and we buy from people and from companies that we trust and that we believe are authentic. And so using content that's authentically yours, that's authentically created by you, will further the trustworthiness of your brand. But trying to cut corners and cheat, I'm afraid, there may be a short-term gain that you can realize, but the long-term detriment, it's going to be high.
Nice. All right. Well, let's wrap things up by how we started. That's relationships. You guys shared your meet cute, going to the football game together and building this relationship, building this business together. But Rusty, talk about the importance of relationship building along this authority journey and how important it is and what either steps people can take, whether it's digitally, whether it's in person. Talk about that and the idea of relationship building with authority.
Yeah, well, to me, one of the most rewarding parts of building authority or building an audience is it gives you a chance to put a spotlight on people that you think have a message that needs to be heard. And I hear it from many of our authors. The most rewarding part for many of them of doing the book was each chapter thinking about who they wanted to feature, who they wanted to quote and interview and involve in the book. And I think the magic of that is twofold. Number one, it makes it a better book in many cases or a better piece of content because you're bringing different perspectives. But number two, when you involve somebody in your article, in your podcast, in your book, you're kind of empowering them with a reason to refer you in a way that they're winning as they do it. So I would say that's one of the coolest things about getting active is it gives you a way to give a hand up to people, but also put a spotlight on people that you think have a message that needs to be heard. And then for a lot of leaders, when I talk to them 2 or 3 years after getting active, the most rewarding thing for them are the relationships they built with people that they never would have otherwise come in contact with. That, their book sent somebody's business off into a completely different stratosphere because they read it or that blog post. And so I think that's one of the cool things about it is just the people you meet because you're communicating and generating information at scale, you're reaching people that you otherwise never would have come in contact with.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Joe, to Rusty's point, authority opens doors. The more authority you have, the more doors that open. And when a door opens, typically it creates opportunity, right? When a door opens, there's an opportunity behind that door. And opportunities come from people and relationships that you are able to build and foster with those people. So if you want to grow your authority, you're going to open more doors. And the more doors that you open, the more opportunities that you have. And those opportunities are going to come from the quality relationships that you build with people. And your authority directly impacts the level of relationship that you can build with someone and the quality of the people that you can build that relationship with. So, authority is a key ingredient to really improving your effectiveness at opening doors, creating opportunities, and building high quality relationships.
Awesome. And Rusty, if folks wanted to connect with you after you're watching or listening to this, where should they start? What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, rustyshelton.com is probably the best place to connect with me. I've got a blog that's pretty active there. I do a lot of speaking as well, and people can get there, or they can find Adam in my book at theauthorityadvantage.com or Amazon.
Awesome. And according to Perplexity, Rusty Shelton is a prominent entrepreneur, author, and marketing strategist who has made significant contributions to the fields of publishing, digital marketing, and thought leadership. So, Rusty, you are legit. Thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Rusty.
Adam, what a great time to reminisce about your relationship with Rusty and look back and look forward. to the world of authority.
Yes, the stroll down memory lane, Joe.
Yeah. So, Adam, as we wrap up this episode, talking about the future of authority, obviously, when it comes to the future, we always have to look at the past. And in this episode, we talked about, even though a lot of things have changed, a lot of them are the same, right? When it comes to authority building.
Yeah. Keep the main thing, right? It's all about authenticity. It's all about accelerating trust and using authority to accelerate trust. And obviously being authentic and being genuine and real is going to allow you to foster and build deeper connections with your audience. Those things have not changed. I mean, that was the case 10 years ago. I believe it'll probably be the case 10 years from now. But certainly the tools that we use have changed rapidly.
Awesome. Adam, thanks so much for your time. I'll see you next time.
All righty.